So by the time this releases, I'll be able to say that it was late last night on the whitehouse.gov when an article arrived titled President Joe Biden to establish first ever White House Office of Gun Violence Prevention to be overseen by Vice President Kamala Harris. A few news organizations have picked this up ahead of me, but until today, until Friday, the 22nd of September, 2023, I don't think anyone's really going to be talking about it. I think right now we're waiting in anticipation for exactly what's going to be said. But in an attempt to be ahead of the curve, this short morning segment is just going to cover a little bit of what's going on here. So the president, so the Redacted Culture Cast tends to focus on things that are gun culture related, and then dig deeper into philosophy and theology and community building. And this is an interesting case because there is a consistency within gun culture and news and communications of this platform where different subjects gather different amounts of attention. And I think this is a place that, and I'm addressing this subject ahead of time because I do want to get ahead of, maybe let's call it, the hype or the reaction. There's a strategy in politics where the goal is not to produce anything itself other than a reaction from your opponent. And I don't necessarily think this is the case. But if we give off too much of our energy simply to the outrage of certain things happening, we might waste our efforts before they are effective. But also in this way that I want to be able to decipher a couple of things that I think that are being said but left off the page. So let's begin. I am reading this late in the evening of September 21st. And so when I say tomorrow, it will actually be today, September 22nd, the day that this will be releasing. And so, as written, tomorrow, President Biden will announce the establishment of the first ever White House Office of Gun Violence Prevention to reduce gun violence, which has ravaged communities across the country, and implement and expand upon key executive and legislative action which has been taken to save lives. Once again, the beginning of the article or the beginning of the statement is set in language, staged in language, even couched in language that is going to, of any natural case, promote the idea that someone is suggesting. No one's going to come out and say, hey, I have a bad idea, let's go give it a shot, unless that statement of a bad idea is stated in sarcasm. And this arrives at the heel of what we saw happening with Governor Grisham, where she originally came out with a very aggressive statement saying, declaration of sorts, her executive order declaring that the citizens of Albuquerque were not going to be allowed to execute their Second Amendment rights through the right to bear arms, or such as the right to bear arms. And after criticism, instead of canceling the whole thing, she just dialed it back. After the backlash, she made her response, which was not a 0, but still a -1. They went all the way in the paint and then backtracked to halfway. This is kind of what you see stated by. This is similar to the strategy that you see talked about by James Lindsay in the dialectic. I suggest or I enact an extreme measure and then take a halfway measure, or what somebody like Donald Trump has been known to do with the big ask. Ask for $1,000, hoping to get 100. And so if we were to go on and read this, we would find out that the new Office of Gun Violence Prevention will be overseen by Vice President Harris, who has been a key leader in the Biden-Harris administration's efforts to end our nation's gun violence epidemic. There will be other people involved in this, which I think is actually the greater concern, because anything that comes out of the Biden presidency right now is going to be moderately predictable when it comes to gun control and similar activities. And that predictability should not turn into a repeat of rage, depression, rage, but rather recognize that the people are going to continue saying the same things. The people who continue to say the same things after being corrected are not interested in an honest conversation to begin with. So jumping to the very end, let's start where this thing finishes. President Biden continues to call on Congress to take action, including by 1, banning assault weapons and high capacity magazines, 2, requiring safe storage of firearms, 3, requiring background checks for all gun sales, 4, eliminating gun manufacturers' immunity from liability, and 5, enacting his Safer America plan, which would put more police officers on our streets for accountable community policing and invest in gun violence prevention and intervention. Now, this, if it was taken in a void, would be a really easy thing to look at. First of all, we have the issue with assault weapons and high capacity magazines, most often, if not always, defined by people who have no idea what they are to begin with. You'd think that you would want it to be a different way, but this is the world that we live in. There's a comment that there's a comment that continues to be a bother to most of us within gun control, I'm sorry, in gun culture. Big, is that a Freudian slip? Would Freud be able to define that? Who knows? But there is a continual frustration within this sort of political debate that goes back and forth, which is, why is it the case that those who are the most capable and understanding of firearms, their types, and their components are never the ones who are given a stage to talk about what they are and what they do? In the famous words of, what was it, Massey, the internet will correct you and it will be funny. And so we can skip past the assault weapons and high capacity magazines bans, because that's sort of an old hat and we don't need to go into details on that one. The second one is requiring the safe storage of firearms, which violates at least one of the amendments, because it requires that the government have some way of monitoring you in your own home. The third one is requiring background checks for all gun sales. This is an old hat idea. I understand the argument behind it, but it's not the argument itself, but the enforcement, which will be the issue. Then there is eliminating gun manufacturers' immunity from liability. This is a direct economic warfare strategy. If I can put your organization, your company at risk anytime anybody chooses anything that is remotely affiliated with your company and use it for evil, I can hold you accountable. Well, then you are always open to economic attack. If the right to bear arms was a castle, the eliminating gun manufacturers' immunity from liability would be saying you do not have the right to own a gate. Your portico is against our rules. And so the issue being straightforward, and I don't want to beat the horse to death any further, would be to recognize that these statements that are being made by the president and the White House are nothing new under the sun. There are going to be plenty of other channels and other communications that are going to go into detail on these subjects. And certainly we could go into it if we wanted to, but that is not going to be my place in today's conversation. First of all, we know that these things are going to be the things that they're going to say. We know that what the responses are going to be. And so we're no longer at the part of conversing over the subject, but rather using a intelligent and moral position within our legislation to prevent them from going forth. Assault weapons can't be banned because the people don't give the people who, well, because they will not be defined. High capacity magazines should not be banned because that it goes against the Second Amendment itself. Requiring the safe storage of firearms requires there to be some sort of regulatory system over that, and that regulation, whatever monitors it, whatever enforces it, is going to have to invade your home to confirm compliance. Requiring background checks for all gun sales is a nice idea in a perfect world if you could try to say know the hearts of all men. And then eliminating gun manufacturers' immunity from liability is simply the shot over the bow saying, if you don't give us what we want, we will take your money in court. So this is a breaking down of the separation between civil and what do you call civil, a civil form of responsibility versus what's the other one that everybody knows? Criminal. So you're not, you want to do criminal and civil liability. You want to remove that from gun manufacturers. Like it's such an old hat argument. It's such an old idea that you would wonder what has to go through somebody's mind to continue presenting the same ideas over and over and over again. But where I think this announcement goes wrong, and goes wrong in the worst kinds of ways, is that you have a president who has a, he doesn't look like he's going to be able to, or likely will not be running a second term. We don't know for sure, but it's kind of on the rocks, to be gentle. But now he's appointing an office. And so this is an appointed position. It's not an elected position. That means more bureaucrats. And also, by this method of appointment, he's creating another version of the military industrial complex problem. And so you have Stephanie Fieldman, who is going to be one of the key players in this, and I'm sure Jack Posobiec will jump onto it and do what he did with the Ministry of Truth kind of concept that was brought up about a year ago. But Stephanie Fieldman has worked with President Biden for more than a decade, so I'm sure she knows a little bit about his private dealings. And then there's Greg Jackson, who will serve as special assistant to the president and deputy director of the White House Office of Gun Violence Prevention. That's a mouthful. Greg has been a gun violence prevention leader for over 10 years. And if you go to to the organization that he's attached to, let's see if it's even listed here. Greg has led the Community Justice Action Fund, which in the logo has the communist fist. But Greg has been a part of the Community Justice Action Fund, which on their website has 3 agenda items: to invest in proven strategies to prevent gun violence before it happens, red flag laws; to agenda item 2, advance public health approach to gun violence. Don't let people live. Use a form of community justice, which is communal justice, which is partisan and partial towards parties and communities, the opposite of what we'd consider real justice. Again, the opening line of that is, gun violence is one of the largest health crises of our time, with it being the leading cause of premature death for all youth and Black men in America. Not really a good look if you're looking for a community or something that actually reaches America. And then agenda item 3, ending gender-based violence. So it's not good enough that they want to end violence, because that would be a nice way of saying it, but he wants to focus on gender-focused positions. So immediately from his platform, you're seeing you're seeing something that is the opposite of Joe Biden's bipartisan. The Biden Harris administration has worked to implement the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. It's that it is extremely partisan, and that's kind of an issue. Now, why is partisanship a problem? We all know that we all quite. And then there's a third character by the name of Rob Wilcox, who, what is his he served as the senior director of federal government affairs at Everytown for gun safety, which we'll get to in a second. So the challenge that you're running into here is that, in conjunction with trying to make a claim that you're publishing or you're producing this office in support of a bipartisan Communities Act, you are promoting and appointing individuals of a single political position to an office in the federal government. So it is no longer bipartisan. If it ever was to begin with, that can be done with. And the challenge that you have to face here, as both the president and the population, is, why are you picking only one side if you're trying to work for the country? And this goes to show the one-sided nature of these kinds of engagements, and how the desire or the allure of cynicism can creep in. It's not cynical. I don't think the cynicism that gun culture faces is a skepticism towards the legitimacy or integrity of those being put into these positions of power, but rather their cynicism is that there's nothing, that it's over, that it's doomer pilled, that we're done here. And I don't think that is a good way to go, because I am an anti-nihilist. But this third part, which I think is really the best piece, is that Robert Wilcox will also serve as a special assistant to the president and deputy director of the White House Office of Gun Violence Prevention. Previously, Rob served as the senior director of federal government affairs at Everytown for gun safety. So if you exist within a partisan organization, we've got two of them now, and those partisan organizations are explicitly in activation, explicitly partisan and explicitly directed towards certain peoples, and you have built this organization, the president will appoint you into a position. They will build an office for you and put you in the government. And this goes against the grain of a government for, by, and of the people, when the people who get into these unelected positions, who, as it is stated in the beginning and the end, will implement and expand upon key executive and legislative action which has been taken to, as they say, save lives. And this is the point, and this is the problem, is that a president, a White House, has chosen political operatives who have created organizations that are particularly focused on certain partisan positions and appointed them to the White House. This would be like if you were to go into the hyperbole of criticism that is thrown against gun culture. This would be like the president appointing the NRA as his board. Now, we know that the NRA itself is not really the point of conversation, but you're looking at something like that. And if we were to talk hypocrisy, it would get old. And if we were going to talk government malfeasance, it would be tired. But rather, we need to look at what we're saying here, and we're recognize what these kind of worldviews imply. Certainly, you have a president who doesn't care about whether or not what he's doing is bipartisan at all. And I'm sure he has his own opinions and positions going forward into this. But the challenge that's being presented is that you have a new appointed office. Now, what is that office going to do? I'm sure we want to hear more about it. They're going to either do one of two things. And really, the crazy thing about it is they're only going to really be able to do one of two things. They're going to continue making pointless political statements into the ether, advertising their moral supremacy and fundraising for an office. Sure. I mean, you know what? You got to fundraise for office, right? That's not really against the rules. It's just be open about it. And then the second part, the other thing that they're going to do is actually overstep the bounds of, or potentially overstep the bounds of the executive branch by strong arming legislation into certain positions. Now, the strong arming can be a little it might be a little hyperbolic. Rather, let's look at what we've seen in the past. In the past, the Biden administration has bribed states to implement red flag laws. And red flag laws are a partisan activity. So he has used bipartisan tax funds, or he's used money that the government has either printed or taken from multiple people through taxes, and use that to pay states to implement the laws that they would deem right. Now, okay, let's reverse the roles here. Wouldn't you want a president to incentivize states to make legal or illegal things that are affecting your community in a certain way? Yeah, I mean, that doesn't sound too unreasonable. The problem is, though, is that it's not what's being presented here as well is not reasonable. It is not reasonable to assume that the suggestions that are being implemented are either moral nor effective. On a utilitarian sense, they are not moral because they are not effective, causing more harm than good. On a pure moral imperatives position, they are also immoral because they go against, infringe upon, or enslave populations. By disarming a population, you move them closer to slavery, not further from it. And that sounds like a whole lot of politics for a Friday morning, and I apologize if I got you a little riled up. But I think that there's a way that we need to look at this going forward. We know that these activities are going to take place, and we are going to expect an ask for 1,000, even if they're going to take 100. They're going to expect the Donald Trump big ask, or the James Lindsay dialectic to take place here. where you're trying to move the needle, so you're going to try to move it a mile, and if you get a foot or a meter, you still move the needle. But the issue that I think is most concerning is that the administration has announced that they will be appointing political individuals who have built organizations, who are at the heads of organizations that range from openly communist to perhaps you have the Bloomberg funding, and you have all these other kind of big money issues. And he's going to be able to, instead of go through legislation, try to appoint people into those positions. A concern that would be presented is that the ATF in the beginning of this year, 2023, implemented their brace ruling. And the brace ruling itself not only affected gun culture, because now there was a big shift on what was available on the market, but it also impacted the market. People who worked within the firearms industry had less money to spend because their companies couldn't sell the products that they were selling on the shelves, and that created not only a trickle down effect but a rippling effect, where you already had the economic concerns that we're dealing with, which with high gas prices and higher food costs at the grocery store, and you match it with you work in gun culture, you lose your job because your company can't sell a braced pistol anymore. And I think that's what we're starting to see take place here, is you're seeing something more effective, something more thorough, something more intelligent than simply the guns are bad, we should take it away from people. You have mixed levels of approach, which I think is a good strategy. I have to commend the Biden administration for implementing an effective strategy, at least as outlined within this this article, this statement made by the White House, because it gets the attention of the low information voters, which is banning assault weapons. It gets the attention of the middle-ish kind of first order thinking people who don't understand, who aren't looking to understand that by implementing a safe storage law, they're going to be able to open up a new avenue of approach for officers to enter into your household. And then it's even a third order one, or a third line down the road, which is requiring background checks for all gun sales, which on its nose might sound reasonable to the average person, but when you dig into it, implies that you're looking for a criminal before a criminal activity. And then we get the fourth one, which is the big coup de grace, eliminating gun manufacturers' immunity from liability and enacting his Safer America plan, which would put more police officers on our streets for accountable community policing and invest in gun violence prevention and intervention. I know that that sounds great. It's a little ambiguous, and from a president who earned his position, who achieved his vote, or I'm sorry, this is the best part. Um, the this whole position to be overseen by Vice President Kamala Harris, who was elected during a year which a party ran on the idea of defund the police. The Vice President, Kamala Harris, is going to be in charge of enacting the Safer America plan, which would put more police officers on our streets. So she went from defund the police to let them into your homes to look at your house. Kind of a crazy move, if you think so. It's a big swing. And if we were to go and just look at or if we were to go look at how culture may respond to this, the reason why I wanted to get ahead of this article and put this part out beforehand was to, one, illustrate some of the things that are going on inside of it, but two, to hopefully encourage you as you go forward to not give in to the despair. There's going to be a panic attack and a bunch of movement. And this is a good time to say, hey, you're 1 minute ahead of the announcement. Don't give in to the rage bait. Instead, choose to make wise decisions in who you know is working for your benefit. Instead of giving in to saying it's all bad and it's all going to hell, this is what being a citizen means. When we abdicate from our responsibilities, that when we abdicate from our communities, when we don't actually participate, we have to deal with the consequences of a vice president who Yeah, we'll just go back into that. You just replay the clip for entertainment's sake. And that being the case, I got to close this off because we're going to be putting out a second episode later today. It's going to be a long form one. And that one is an interview with Tyler from the Longhouse podcast. And we had a long conversation on theology, faith, and how in his description there are three pillars that a person must have. There is they must have a physical pillar, and that is how you keep your physical health together, and then it could also include kit. There is a mental pillar that we must maintain, and that is how your mindset functions, how you keep what you think about, how you think about things, and then the third one is a spiritual pillar. And as we discussed, the spiritual pillar is the foundation. The mental pillar is built on top of that spiritual pillar, and then on top of that, we have our physical pillar. And so in this case, in the case of the White House, and I'll go full screen for those on YouTube to see just how dark it is. In the case that we're dealing with here, we should not be surprised when these decisions happen. We also should not be surprised when people are convinced by bad arguments. But that does not give us an excuse to engage in nihilism and then quit all rational and moral pursuit. If everything is meaningless and nothing is true, then why pursue anything at all but for some sort of arbitrary whim like power? And we already know that that is wrong. We've addressed it many times. We can continue to address how that is an immoral position to have. But if we give in to nihilism, we close out before the bell is even rung, then we cannot claim the credit for running the race. And so, in encouragement, we know that things are like this are going to happen. We know that this is a call to recognize that you exist in a community, and if you want to isolate yourself from everybody, then you will become part of the problem. It doesn't mean that we all need to sit around the campfire and sing kumbaya. What it does mean is that we as a community and we as individuals do better when we look out for one another, when we hold each other accountable, when we engage in it. And if that starts in your church, if that starts at your range, if that starts in your living room as you invite people over, go forward and do such. And as we say when we close out the show, well, we'll get to that in a second. If you want to support us, you can head over to redactedllc.com. That's just the website. You can join our newsletter, also known as the Dead Drop. And that will be the first announcement of when anything else that we come out with, any other way that you want to support us, or you can head over to redactedculture.locals.com. And I know that's like, oh, look, this guy is talking about bad things happening and then plugging a system. Thank you for your support. I don't wish to dissuade you any further. With that being said, go forth and conquer.